to keep safe, we had to get tested for COVID every week. Yes, that poking you've heard about, we had to do it every week.
It's got to be money.
Deep on ina chinja pendena kumana nai. Ooh you yes.
Hi everyone, and today I'm going to share with you about my experience of being a PhD student and teaching in-person classes during the COVID-19 pandemic. So as a PhD student, for most PhD programs here in the US, there are several responsibilities that you have as a PhD student. So first, of course, you're going to classes and you're learning to gain like knowledge and kind of to become an expert in a certain field, kind of specialize. So you go to classes to learn that, and in addition to that, you also have to do research. And so this research looks different for different people, and so you can do for us in STEM, in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field. Most research has to do with you going to doing experiments, go to the lab, kind of do lab work, require wet lab. So you're actually doing experiments on the bench, or you can be doing experiments on a computer, kind of doing bioinformatics, kind of just analyzing stuff on the computer, or you can work in a field, working at maybe you go to a farm, you go to a different area, you go to the hills, the mountains, and so you're doing that. Okay, so that's research. And then again, for several of PhD or master's programs, one of the things that you also expect to do is you have to work. So for the majority, you're working on campus, but then some people choose to also work off campus. And again, when it comes to the kind of working, the most common kind of work is actually when you're teaching. And so that's kind of the work that I did this semester during the COVID-19. So you're teaching undergrads for the most part, there's the freshmen, sophomore, juniors, seniors. Sometimes you're also teaching other graduate students, master students. And so it's kind of and this teaching also looks different. You can teach them you're teaching a lab, you're teaching a small class, a discussion class, or you're teaching an actual lecture room. So it's different for different fields. And other people work maybe in the library, in the media office, or in a different department. So it looks different, and so you're required to do that. And so for me, this semester, the fall semester, which is generally from August to December, I was actually teaching. And then I was actually teaching an in-person class, but as you know, due to COVID-19, almost all classes were converted to be remote online classes, kind of to make so to as a safety guideline to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. But at our school, there were a few courses that had to kind of that actually were justified to be essential classes, where it was known that these classes couldn't really be converted to online. When you're talking about experiments and teaching students how to conduct certain protocols, to do certain experiments, it's really hard to make these things virtual. And so some classes passed to be essential. But even if they were face-to-face classes, they still had to follow safety guidelines. And so I'll talk about that in a minute. And so going back a little bit, as we know, beginning of the year, so for us in particular, in March of 2020, there was a statewide lockdown was issued. And so our state governor for Massachusetts, just sometime in March, I can't remember the exact date, was okay, so everything is shutting down, we're having a lockdown, only essential services are remaining. It's groceries, hospitals. And so when that happened, that time was just kind of just before the spring break. And so our spring semester starts from January to April, end of April, and school courses in May. So somewhere in the middle, which is in March, we have a 1 week break. And so when the governor issued that lockdown, what our school decided to do was fine, so people will go for their spring break, but they won't come back. After spring break, everything is going to be remote. And so at that time, everyone, including people who were doing hands-on work, they had to find a way of just finishing the second half of the semester remotely. And so yeah, so after that spring break, nobody came down, nobody came back to school. Even as PhD students, like even if like, so as a PhD student, you do research like almost throughout the year. If classes are there or no classes are not there, you're still doing your research. It's kind of like part of your work, part of your thesis. And like if you want to graduate early, you won't take long breaks. So it's kind of like throughout. And so, but then when that happened, like we couldn't go back to the lab. Yeah, so things closed down, no classes. So for me, in the spring semester, I was not actually teaching, but I was doing research. And so I was actually mentoring a student in research, teaching him like research and experiments in our lab. And when the lockdown happened, we couldn't go back to the lab. But lucky enough, we had clearly like data, and so after the spring break, we actually started meeting remotely to kind of like summarize our data, analyze it, and kind of like present it in like graphs and summaries. So that worked out really well. And yeah, so like Zoom was like our way of like mentoring. And so when the summer happened, you know, it was now more obvious to us to say this COVID is not going anywhere. So our school had to find a way of like, okay, let's find a way in which we can kind of like safely bring back researchers to do their research work, but safely under like the COVID-19 guidelines. And so this towards the end of the summer, they had like a system in place. So yes, you had to sign in like what time you'd be in the lab and for how long. So you couldn't just be in the lab like the whole day. You actually had to do like certain shifts. And so it was only like for a few hours, like 4 hours, and it could be like early in the morning, in the middle of the day, late at night. There were actually some labs, I know like a friend where in her lab, it was like a strict shift, where like they even had shifts at night, like after midnight you had a shift, like midnight to 4 a.m. and then 4 a.m. to 8, like it was like crazy like that. And that was like just like a way of like making sure people, only the fewest people are there. Initially you could only be like one person at a time for those 4 hours, and then it started increasing slowly. Now it could be 2 people in the lab, then 3, then 4, and so that's how they could actually like make it safe. And so you had to like, yeah, so you had to log in so that in case someone got COVID, they would know who was in there, they would know who else was there, who they were in touch with, and they could like isolate the person. And then of course, when the statewide lockdown happened, wearing masks became mandatory. Like if you're in public, you have to wear a mask. So for us, when you go onto campus, UMass, you have to wear a mask. So we're wearing masks like the whole time. In a grocery store, at a gathering, like everyone has to wear masks. So like we had to do that. And so that was like the issue for the lab. So by the time like end of the summer, we had that in place, so we could actually like start doing our research work, but it was like a little slow pace because we could only be in the lab for a few hours at a time. Before COVID, oh my gosh, I used to spend so many hours in the lab. My friends was like, Jenny, you're always in the lab. So anyway, after COVID came, I couldn't spend that time. I didn't have that luxury. And then I actually was like, I now live like an hour away from school, and so I really have to plan my time. I just can't say like, oh, I'll be in the lab until 22, and then I get home like 23 an hour later. Like this is like not conducive. I used to live like 10 minutes away initially, so it was kind of like really easy to just kind of go back and forth. So that's it for the lab. Then how did we make sure we were safe in the teaching class? So I was really nervous about teaching a face-to-face class. I was just like, Lord. And then as you know, like in the US, like by the time it was the summer, the cases really went up. And that notion of like, no, the summer is going to be a time where the COVID-19 is going to go away because of the heat, that's a lie. Because Florida, California, as examples, these are like warm states. These people don't even experience, maybe a few places experience the snow, but like this tropical, this is like the Africa of the US. It's like always warm, beautiful, hot weather. They had really high cases of COVID in their time, so that thing just like didn't happen. And then at UMass, we have students in any university, you have students coming from all over the state. So I was kind of like nervous, like, oh my goodness, like I'm gonna be teaching students where they've come from, these high cases. And there's actually once when there's like a picture floating around of like in March of like students in Florida at the beach. That's like a lot of them packed, but they were so packed, no masks, no nothing in Florida. At that time, the notion was that, oh, only like young people don't get COVID, only like the older people. And so like I was just like, oh my gosh, what if some of those students are the ones who want to come back and we have to teach them? So I was really nervous about that. But I'm so grateful. It was a great semester. We had great students. No one got COVID, thankfully. And then until the semester, semester ended, like no one. So really grateful for that. So I was just like, oh my god, I'm going to have to like teach in person. I don't know where those kids are coming from. And yeah. So anyway, to keep safe, we had to get tested for COVID every week. Yes, that poking you've heard about, we had to do it every week as like research students, faculty members, instructors. But our students actually had it worse. They had to get tested twice. A week, getting tested twice. And so for you to be on campus, you had to have a negative test. And that's how they kind of like maintain this kind of like safe environment. And they did a really great job. Though there was one time in the middle of a semester where like one group of undergrad students decided to hold a party. Trying to have a good time, you know, COVID life is boring. You would do a party, no mask, no sanitizer, no nothing. And then that following week when people had to get tested, 13 people got COVID-19 and they were all linked to that same one party. The school panicked. They were just like, oh my gosh. They really panicked, but they did a great job. They contained it all. They kind of could like trace who was in contact with who, and they made everyone quarantine. They made everyone quarantine until they all got like negative tests. So like that was actually good like control. But that happened when that thing happened. It was about the time where other schools around, because we live like in a 5 college town where like all the different towns are like have colleges. And so people in like say like like all the other schools, high schools, middle schools, were supposed to open school that week. But when they heard that at UMass there's this like cluster of like cases, they decided not to open their schools. They're like, we don't want any spread. So parents were so mad, like, please, like, think about us. Our kids have been staying at home for like from March up to like September. Like, they want them to go to school, but they have to be safe. Stop having parties, please. That was sad, like, but then like the school did a good job to contain that. And so how does it happen? So you have to make an appointment, and like UMass has kind of like they just like opened up, like they're giving like all these tests to every student free of charge, and now like to like communities around free of charge. And so how does this actually work? So when you go to so you go to the testing center, we have testing centers, 2 on campus, I think maybe 3 on campus, and some outside. So when you go there, again, you have to like wear your mask. When you get there, you like hand sanitize, and then you can like wait in line. And then waiting in line, you have to sort of like, they're like spots where like, you know, which are like 6 feet apart. So that's how, like, when you stand here, you have to wait until the next spot, the next 6 feet spot next to you is free. They give you a Qtip. So this here is called a Qtip. When I first heard the word Qtip, I didn't imagine this. I can't remember what we call this back home, but it's just like, yeah, like for me, I call it like the earbud cleaner. So they give you a Qtip, and it's sealed like in a plastic for like sterility, and this is what you're going to use to collect samples to see whether you have COVID-19 or not. And so, as you know, COVID-19 is like a respiratory like infection, and so your nose is a good sample for to see whether like you have the virus or not. And so they give this to you. So you have a bottle, you have this, and then you go to the next area where like you can like have like this kind of like little privacy, and you go in there, and then you have to now collect your samples. So how does this actually work? So it is poking your nose. And so when you're ready, you can like you open the seal of the Qtip, and then you have to now like put this Qtip into your nose and kind of like swirl around for 10 seconds to like get as much like of the sample, the stuff in your nose as possible. 10 seconds, you take it out, and then you put it in your other side. 10 seconds, you poke your nose, and then you take it out, and then you open the little tube, and then you put in the sample. then you seal it, then you actually leave the sample for them, and then it goes for analysis. They are checking to see if your samples contain the virus, and they use Qtip PCR, and they have like specific primers that they have actually designed to detect that. And so you get your results in 24 hours to 24 to 36 hours. And how do this come? So if your test is negative, you get an email within 24 hours. The email will come to see your results are ready, and there's like a link. You have to click on the link, and to securely take it to like your portal. It tells you your results. COVID-19, negative, and there's a part of a drop down menu where they can actually explain how this test was done. Yeah, so you always want to receive an email. When I receive an email and I'm like, thank you, Lord. The first time I was getting tested, I was just like, Lord, please, if there's COVID-19, by fire, let it burn. Yeah, so you want to get an email. But if the tests are positive, you will get a phone call. You don't want to receive a phone call. Probably like 24 to 36 hours, like a little later. So the clinic will call you and they'll say, oh, your test was positive. Yeah, so they'll call you and give instructions on like how to like quarantine and get tested and stuff. And you have to get multiple negative results before you come out of the quarantine. And so that was that. And thankfully, thank you, Lord, from like the whole semester of like the whole teaching, going to school, teaching in person and stuff, like from August to December. Now school is closed. Thank God I had negative tests. We all had negative tests in our class, and that's like really great. And so that's how it was. So how do we actually teach? How did we actually teach safely in the class? We only had 7 students in the class, right? But then when you're doing experiments like face to face, it's kind of like hard, especially like in our lab setting, it's kind of hard to keep your 6 feet distance. So we had to kind of like double up our protection, because we knew at some point you had to be really close to a student to show them how to do an experiment. And so we'd wear a lab coat, of course, the gloves, of course, and then like the mask, and then in addition we also had to wear a face shield. And that face shield was kind of like double protection, because there'll be times where we'll be closer than 6 feet with our students.
It's got to be
Na kumana nai. Ooh you yes. Ooh you yes. Ooh you yes.
That's how we actually did it. But then like only having 7 students was actually really good, because we could only like kind of like be with a student like one student at a time, and only like for like a few minutes, not like for the longest time. And even in the lab we had to kind of like we could only like move in a certain like orientation. There's only like a one-way traffic with like little arrows on the floor, and that was kind of like to avoid people moving like opposite directions. Kind of like, and if you move opposite directions, it kind of like increase your chances of like contact. But if you're all moving one way, and then there are spots where it's 6 feet here, 6 feet there, you kind of like would know. And so we kind of like minimize our contact. And then every week we had meetings as instructors on like, how did this week go, what can we do better, how's it going. And it was like very supportive, and I'm really grateful for that. And so yeah, that was like my experience of like teaching during the COVID-19 pandemic. And for doing research, like even if we had to do shifts and like we're kind of like doing things at a slower pace, I'm still grateful. I've still been able to make progress in my research. And some people kind of like they got like really affected by like the closures. But like for me, even though things are not like as progress as I would want them to be, there's still been progress. So I'm really thankful for that. Yeah, and so that was my experience. And if you have any questions, let us know.